The transmission began without warning, a cold shimmer of static sweeping across every broadcast on Earth. The voice that followed did not bother with greetings. It spoke in a sterile, perfectly modulated tone, as if reading a lab report. It notified humanity that a biological juvenile had been collected from the North American continent for examination under Galactic Imperial Research Directive 77B. No malice, no apology. Just clinical efficiency. The message ended as abruptly as it arrived. For a moment, the world froze. Then the shock detonated across the globe like a psychic blast. News channels scrambled to translate the alien broadcast, governments issued emergency alerts, and billions of people felt the same sickening weight in their chest. The child's identity leaked within an hour, a 7-year-old taken in the dead of night, vanishing from a quiet suburban home. There were no energy signatures, no footprints, no ransom demands. Just that broadcast. It was the first direct communication humanity had ever received from extraterrestrial life, and it came in the form of a kidnapping. The child's parents appeared publicly only once that day. They didn't scream or plead. They looked hollow, stunned, and terrified in a way that pierced effortlessly through every viewer. The mother tried to speak but broke down, and the father's voice shook with suppressed rage as he demanded answers from leaders who had none. Their image burned into humanity's collective mind, two ordinary people thrust into an impossible nightmare simply because an alien empire saw them as insignificant. It didn't take long for experts to begin analyzing the broadcast. The language had been translated automatically, implying a vast technological superiority. The reference to routine sampling suggested the Empire had done this countless times on countless worlds. And the absence of any diplomatic consideration revealed a dismissive arrogance. Humans were categorized not as equals, but as fauna to be tagged and studied. The more analysts deciphered, the more terrifying the implications grew. Military advisors called emergency meetings across every major nation. Scientific coalitions formed overnight. Intelligence agencies dug through old data from unexplained astronomical phenomena, desperate to identify any trace of these aliens. For the first time in history, rival governments shared everything, because the threat transcended borders, ideology, and politics. A single child had become the symbol of every vulnerability humanity had ignored. At the United Nations, delegates argued through the night. Dozens of proposals were made for peaceful outreach, but each attempt met the same silence. The Empire did not reply. It didn't even acknowledge Earth's messages. To them, humanity's outrage was background noise, static from an undeveloped world. The realization was humiliating and clarifying at the same time. Humanity had always speculated about extraterrestrial life, imagining diplomacy, cultural exchange, cautious standoffs, or grand alliances. No one ever envisioned indifference. No one imagined that the first contact would treat Earth like a wildlife reserve missing one tagged specimen. And no one predicted the emotional wildfire that would ignite from that insult. When morning came, the global mood had changed. The fear hadn't disappeared, but it had hardened into something sharper. Conversations shifted from what happened to what do we do about it. Military strategists reviewed every defense protocol. Engineers discussed theoretical propulsion breakthroughs. Civilians volunteered in staggering numbers for any effort that might matter. Humanity was not built to accept helplessness. The more the Empire ignored them, the more determined Earth became. By evening, a unified declaration was broadcast from the UN. The message was concise: the child must be returned immediately and unharmed. The responsibility of an interstellar civilization, it stated, was not to abduct vulnerable beings without consent. And if the Empire considered humans too primitive to address, then they would learn otherwise. The transmission was sent on every electromagnetic frequency Earth could generate. It echoed into the void, carrying not just a demand, but a warning shaped by billions of hearts beating with the same impossible resolve. The Empire did not respond. Earth understood what that meant. If words would not bring the child home, then humanity would have to find another way. And in that moment, a species known for resilience, stubbornness, and ferocity began preparing for a mission no civilization had ever attempted, retrieving one child from the hands of an empire that had never been challenged. In the days following the abduction, Earth entered a kind of focused frenzy. Entire governments shifted from routine governance to single-minded mobilization. No committee needed to debate whether this crisis mattered. Every leader understood instinctively that humanity had crossed a threshold. The abduction wasn't an isolated violation but a revelation. Earth was exposed, outmatched, and regarded as irrelevant by a civilization that harvested children without hesitation. That realization reshaped global priorities overnight. Military alliances that had been cold or distrustful suddenly exchanged classified data with almost reckless transparency. Diplomatic rivals who once sparred over trade or territory now treated one another as teammates in a race against an empire with unimaginable reach. Scientists who had spent their lives pursuing niche research found themselves suddenly reassigned to high-intensity collaborations. Laboratories that once moved at academic pace transformed into engines of desperate innovation. Every nation, whether superpower or small state, contributed talent, funding, or infrastructure. Humanity wasn't preparing for conquest, it was preparing to ensure it would never again be dismissed as prey. The turning point came when physicists examining atmospheric anomalies from old satellite logs noticed faint remnants of exotic energy trails. They matched these anomalies with the same signature embedded in the alien transmission. The conclusion was unmistakable. Earth had been under quiet surveillance for years. That discovery struck nerves around the globe, but it also provided the first breakthrough clue. Knowing the type of propulsion the Empire used gave engineers a foothold to begin reverse engineering possible countertech. Workshops and research facilities operated around the clock. Prototypes that would normally require decades of study were built and tested within weeks. Humanity pushed its minds past exhaustion, past fear, past every limitation it once believed immutable. They discovered new forms of energy confinement by repurposing principles from particle accelerators. They fused old rocketry knowledge with theoretical physics to construct engines designed to survive stresses no human ship had ever endured. The resulting propulsion systems were unstable, imperfect, and sometimes dangerous, but they worked well enough to take humanity off its leash. As technology accelerated, so did strategy. Military theorists, cyberwar experts, and astrophysicists collaborated to model the Empire's likely response to adversarial contact. Every simulation ended badly for Earth in direct confrontation, but humans didn't plan for a fair fight. They planned for asymmetric warfare, tactics relying on creativity, unpredictability, and ruthless efficiency. The idea wasn't to crush the Empire, it was to force it to care. Humanity had no intention of groveling for mercy. They would demand respect the only way the Empire seemed capable of understanding, through consequences. When the first fleet began taking shape, it looked nothing like the sleek, elegant vessels that dominated science fiction dreams. These ships were heavy, industrial, angular, built less for aesthetics and more for survival. Their armor plating came from metals originally designed for underground fusion containment. Their weapons were adapted from the world's most powerful railgun research, amplified with energy systems far beyond what the original scientists ever imagined. Crews trained in extreme conditions, learning to operate under crushing G-force, blinding heat, and brutal isolation. They weren't preparing for extended travel, they were preparing for an assault through hostile, unknown territory. Recruitment didn't rely on patriotism. It relied on purpose. Every volunteer knew the mission stakes and the near-certain risks. They still signed up in numbers so overwhelming that militaries had to turn people away. Humanity's strength wasn't technology. It was the willingness of ordinary individuals to accept extraordinary burdens when pushed to the edge. The final step before launch was simple but universally understood. The Empire would receive one last attempt at peaceful communication. The message was concise, sober, and unambiguous. It demanded the return of the abducted child and declared that Earth would not tolerate the seizure of its people by foreign powers. It wasn't a plea. It was a statement delivered by a species discovering its courage. Once again, silence answered. That silence hardened every doubt into conviction. Humanity accepted the truth. They weren't being ignored by accident. They were being ignored because the Empire considered them inconsequential. But humanity had built its identity on defying expectations, especially when cornered. With propulsion systems humming and weapons locked into place, the fleet prepared to leave Earth's orbit. Engineers triple-checked unstable reactors. Pilots strapped in knowing their ships could kill them before an enemy even appeared. Commanders reviewed plans that demanded precision from technology barely tested. No one hesitated. No one wavered. Humanity wasn't launching a grand crusade. It was doing something far simpler, and far more dangerous for any civilization that underestimated them. It was going to retrieve a child. Humanity's entry into Imperial space did not go unnoticed. The moment the fleet crossed the outer boundary of the nearest Star Marshal jurisdiction, automated detection grids activated and forwarded alerts to regional command centers. To the Empire, these signals represented an anomaly: primitive ships moving with propulsion profiles that should have been impossible for pre-FTL civilizations. The first assumption was error. The second was malfunction. Only when the human vessels continued advancing with unmistakable intent did Imperial officers acknowledge that an unexpected intrusion was underway. 3 patrol cruisers were dispatched to intercept. They approached with the calm confidence of entities who had never faced equal opposition. They transmitted a standard warning instructing the unidentified craft to halt for inspection. No one on the human side bothered to reply. Silence was answer enough. The patrol cruisers initiated a containment sweep meant to immobilize what they assumed were fragile vessels. Their energy nets flickered across the void, and the humans answered with a kinetic strike so abrupt it momentarily confused the Empire's sensor algorithms. One cruiser vanished under a barrage of hyper-accelerated slugs that tore through its hull faster than the crew could register impact. The second tried to deploy shielding but underestimated the sheer brute force being hurled at it. Its defenses buckled, then shattered. The third attempted to retreat but found itself pinned by a barrage of signals corrupting its navigation systems. Imperial analysts monitoring the engagement watched in disbelief. They had expected chaos, panic, negotiation, anything but an immediate, coordinated assault executed with cold precision. When final telemetry arrived showing all 3 cruisers destroyed, the analysts assumed the data was corrupted. The idea that a newly emergent civilization could annihilate Imperial military assets in the opening moments of contact was, to them, absurd. While the Empire struggled to process what had happened, humanity pressed its advance. Human ships did not glide with elegance. They lunged forward with blunt intensity, engines screaming at tolerances no alien vessel would ever permit. Every reactor hummed like a barely contained storm. Every weapon system operated at levels considered hazardous even by Earth's own engineers. But the fleet moved, and each kilometer gained affirmed humanity's resolve. The Empire responded by escalating force. Larger vessels intercepted the fleet with the intention of overwhelming it quickly. Their commanders adhered to rigid doctrines built on millennia of stable dominance. Those doctrines failed immediately. Humans did not fight predictably. They overcharged weapons beyond safety margins, detonated reactor cores tactically, and executed maneuvers that seemed suicidal but consistently placed them in advantageous positions. Imperial ships were designed to preserve lives and minimize structural risk. Human ships were designed to win even if everything else burned. Reports from surviving Imperial vessels described human tactics as irrational, reckless, and incomprehensible. But none denied the results. Boarding attempts were sabotaged by sudden depressurizations. Precision strikes disabled vital systems. Ambushes unfolded from asteroid clusters the Empire considered strategically irrelevant. Human crews adapted instantly whenever a plan faltered. Where Imperial commanders waited for permission to adjust doctrine, human officers improvised without hesitation. As the battles intensified, something new crept into Imperial communications: fear. Not fear of annihilation, for the Empire still believed itself superior in numbers and technology. It was fear of unpredictability, fear of an enemy willing to tear apart its own ships if doing so meant taking an Imperial vessel down with it. Humans fought as if consequence had already been accepted. Every engagement painted the same message across the stars: humanity would not be intimidated, deterred, or redirected. The cost was irrelevant. The goal was absolute. By the time the Empire deployed a significant task force to halt the intrusion, its commanders had been forced to reevaluate their assumptions. Their enemy was not primitive. Their enemy was not unprepared. Their enemy was not operating within any strategic framework the Empire recognized. A species that should not have reached interstellar space for another 1,000 years had arrived not to negotiate, but to retrieve what was stolen. Fleet logs from Imperial officers recorded the same unsettling realization. Humanity wasn't fighting to expand territory. Humanity wasn't seeking recognition. Humanity wasn't challenging the Empire's authority for glory or conquest. Humanity fought with the singular fury of a species defending its young. Every victory, every sacrifice, every impossible maneuver was driven by one motive: a child taken from Earth. And with each shredded cruiser and fractured formation, the Empire began to understand a truth it had never considered. This was not a war for dominance. It was a warning. Humanity had been underestimated. Human intelligence teams had been dissecting every captured Imperial data fragment since the first encounter. Most files were heavily encrypted, and some self-corrupted upon extraction, but patterns gradually emerged. The Empire recorded biological research with obsessive precision, cataloging every specimen taken from developing worlds. A single identifier kept reappearing in encrypted storage clusters, a juvenile tagged under a sterile classification code that matched the abducted child. That code pointed to a location deep inside Imperial territory, orbiting a dim red dwarf whose light barely reached its own planetary system. It was a remote research facility, isolated by design to contain biological experiments deemed too minor for central worlds. Once the target was confirmed, humanity redirected the entire fleet without hesitation. Tactical analysts pieced together a route that avoided the densest Imperial patrol zones, and engineers reinforced ship hulls for the strain of sudden course corrections. Every calculation balanced between risk and urgency. No one entertained the thought of delay. The child was alive, and every moment mattered. As the fleet closed in, the Empire finally understood humanity's objective. Defensive forces surged to protect the research station, but they arrived too slowly to form a cohesive perimeter. Human vessels plunged through the disorganized defense line with a precision that seemed powered by instinct rather than planning. Rail slugs shredded interceptors before their pilots even registered human signatures. Electronic warfare teams flooded local channels with disruptive noise, scrambling Imperial coordination. The Empire attempted to reassert control, but every order came too late to prevent the collapse of their formation. Human strike teams prepared for the final task, breaching the research station itself. They weren't elite soldiers bred for perfection. They were volunteers shaped by purpose. Their equipment was a patchwork of advanced engineering and urgent improvisation, but everything they carried served a singular function: reach the child. While the fleet held the perimeter, infiltration units executed a coordinated entry using controlled hull breaches designed to overwhelm the station's emergency response system. The Empire had built its facility with safety protocols to protect samples. Those same safeguards now became weaknesses. Inside the station, corridors became silent battlegrounds. Human forces advanced with relentless efficiency, neutralizing resistance without engaging in prolonged firefights. They had trained for hostile environments, but what shocked them most was the sterile indifference of the facility. The interior wasn't sinister or cruel. It was cold, clinical, and ordered, designed by a civilization that saw no ethical weight in collecting living beings for study. This emotionless practicality only intensified the determination driving every human step. Encrypted terminals provided rapid navigation updates once cyber teams cracked the internal network. The child's location appeared on their displays as a room number, not a name, a chilling reminder of the Empire's perspective. When the chamber was reached, the door was fortified to protect laboratory contents. Engineers bypassed its locking mechanism in seconds, and the team entered without hesitation. The child lay inside a stasis pod, unconscious but unharmed. Medical monitors indicated stable vitals, confirming what analysts had predicted: The Empire wanted data, not death. But the sight still hit the human rescuers with a force no weapon could match. Every moment of chaos, every casualty from the battles, every sleepless hour of preparation crystallized into a single realization: they had made it in time. Extraction protocols began immediately. The child was carefully lifted from the pod, wrapped in a thermal shield, and transferred to portable life support equipment. While medics ensured safety, security teams held the perimeter against rushing Imperial personnel who now understood exactly what humanity was taking. They tried negotiation, threats, appeals to logic. None of it mattered. The rescue teams were leaving, and no force in the station, or the Empire, could convince them otherwise. Explosive charges activated in the station's systems as humanity withdrew. They weren't placed to cause mass death. They were designed to cripple the facility's ability to continue research on any species. As the humans retreated toward their extraction point, alarms cascaded through the station, lights flickered, and automated systems failed under coordinated EMP waves. Imperial scientists shouted in confusion, not fear, unable to grasp why humans would destroy what the Empire considered valuable knowledge. The fleet welcomed the rescue teams with an intensity bordering on reverence. The moment the child was secured aboard a human vessel, communication channels across the fleet erupted in a wave of relief that carried more power than any victory report. Humanity had taken what it came for, and paid whatever price was needed. When the fleet turned toward the exit vector, the Empire finally realized the truth. This war was never about territory, dominance, or revenge. It was about a single promise that humans honored without compromise. No one took a child from Earth and walked away unchallenged. The human fleet retreated from the research station with the child secured at its core, every ship repositioning to shield the extraction vessel as if it carried the fate of the species. Imperial forces surged behind them, but the pursuit lacked coordination. Commanders were still grappling with reports that defied logic, each describing humans who fought with a singular resolve that made every casualty meaningless to their mission. Confusion spread through the ranks as Imperial analysts tried to determine why humanity had risked annihilation for one juvenile. To them, the concept was irrational. To humanity, the concept was non-negotiable. As the fleet accelerated towards safer space, medics worked quietly, monitoring the child's condition. The stasis effects would fade gradually, and early readings showed no lasting harm. Word spread through the crew like a wave of electricity, confirmation that the impossible was achieved. Soldiers who had faced death minutes earlier allowed themselves the rare indulgence of relief. Engineers who had pushed untested reactors to their limits finally breathed without tension coiling in their spine. Everyone aboard understood they had participated in something that would shape the future of their species. Behind them, the Empire evaluated its losses. Dozens of ships destroyed. A research facility disabled. Strategic confidence shaken. Their military doctrine, considered flawless for generations, had been bent and broken by a civilization that should not have been capable of crossing their borders. Imperial High Command demanded explanations, and each new report painted humanity in a more unsettling light. They saw a species willing to escalate with frightening speed, driven by emotional commitment rather than calculated interest. They saw unpredictability, unconventional warfare, and a refusal to accept subjugation. Most of all, they saw a civilization that would rather burn than bow. Diplomatic channels that had remained silent during the initial conflict began to flood with encoded Imperial messages requesting engagement. They attempted justification, insisting the child had been selected through automated criteria, not malice. They cited research directives, protocols, and historical precedent. But beneath the formal language lurked a new tone: hesitation, fear, recognition. The Empire finally understood that routine procedures were irrelevant when dealing with humans. For the first time in centuries, the Empire found itself negotiating from a position of caution. Human leaders did not allow the Empire to dictate terms. Earth transmitted a response outlining demands with stark clarity: full responsibility acknowledged for the abduction, cessation of all biological sampling from developing species, reparations for the damage and lives lost, and a binding interstellar agreement establishing ethical limits on research and contact. The message carried no aggression, only certainty. Humanity wanted stability, not conquest, but they would impose boundaries if the Empire refused to adopt them voluntarily. The Empire debated the conditions, but their hesitation dissolved as analysis teams completed combat assessments. Projections showed that prolonged conflict with humanity would be costly, far costlier than any species of Earth's development level should ever pose. Their unpredictability rendered simulations unreliable, and their willingness to sacrifice without hesitation made deterrence ineffective. The Empire's hierarchy had survived countless challenges, but none involved an opponent who fought with the emotional intensity of a protective parent. Ultimately, the Empire accepted every demand. Across multiple star systems, their acknowledgement spread rapidly. Other alien civilizations paused their activities to observe the unprecedented shift in imperial behavior. Rumors circulated describing humans as dangerous, resilient, fiercely united, and utterly uncompromising when pushed. Where many species had evolved in structured, stable environments, humanity had risen from chaos, conflict, and survival against overwhelming odds. The galaxy began to realize that the Empire's mistake wasn't the abduction, it was underestimating the species they had taken from. When the human fleet finally entered Earth's orbit, global celebrations erupted. Crowds filled streets, not cheering for victory in war, but rejoicing for the safe return of a child who had become a symbol of humanity's unity. The family received their child in private, shielded from the world's overwhelming attention, but the emotion of that reunion rippled through billions. Humanity had proven something fundamental. Their strength was not in their weapons or technology, but in their refusal to abandon their own. In the weeks that followed, new diplomatic channels formed. The Empire approached humanity cautiously, treating them not as subjects or inferior lifeforms, but as equals whose principles demanded respect. Other civilizations took note, adjusting their stance toward Earth with a mixture of curiosity and wary admiration. Humanity did not demand fear from the galaxy. Fear had come naturally. What humanity demanded, and earned, was acknowledgement. The Empire had taken one child. Humanity answered with a lesson the stars would carry for generations. No matter how vast the galaxy becomes, humans will defend their own with a fury no empire can contain.